Maren Kowalski knew the secrets of a house long before the people living inside it ever realized they had them. Not because she was nosy, not because she was looking for them. She simply knew how to notice things. A forgotten coffee cup left beside a stack of paperwork. A family member's schedule changed without anyone admitting it. A missing item in the pantry that no one remembered buying. A receipt thrown away too quickly. A house always spoke. Most people just didn't know how to listen. At 6:15 in the morning, the city of Chicago was still wrapped in a pale gray winter mist. The streets of Gold Coast were unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that only existed before the city fully woke up. The Marqueti estate stood behind tall iron gates and carefully trimmed hedges, surrounded by historic mansions that carried generations of wealth in their stone walls. It was beautiful. But Maren had learned something after 3 months of working there. Beautiful houses were not always happy houses. The first time she arrived at the Marqueti residence, she had no idea who owned it. She had been sent there through a private cleaning company that specialized in wealthy clients. The manager had simply told her, "High standards, good pay, keep your head down." Maren had laughed at the last part. Keeping her head down had never been her problem. Being ignored had. She stepped through the employee entrance, hanging her coat neatly on the wooden rack before tying her dark hair back. "Morning, Maren." Anthony, the older head steward, greeted her from the kitchen. "Morning, Anthony." She offered him a smile before checking the day's schedule, taped beside the service entrance. Breakfast preparation, laundry, office cleaning, dinner arrangements. Simple. Predictable. She liked predictable. Predictable meant nothing could surprise you. And after the last 5 years, Maren appreciated anything that didn't surprise her. She slipped into her uniform, a simple black blouse and matching pants. Some people assumed women like her wore oversized clothes because they wanted to disappear. That had never been true. Maren was a woman who took up space. At 32 years old, she had stopped apologizing for her body. She was tall, curvy, and fuller-figured. She had spent years believing she needed to become smaller before she could become successful. Smaller waist, smaller opinions, smaller presence. The world had taught her that confidence belonged to certain kinds of women. She had finally decided the world was wrong. She liked the way she looked. She liked the way she carried herself. She liked that she could walk into a room without asking permission to exist. But confidence didn't mean people suddenly noticed you. Especially not when you worked in someone else's home. House staff were often invisible. When they did their job well, nobody thought about them. That was the strange thing about service. The better you became at your work, the less people remembered you were there. Maren understood that. She had become very good at being invisible. Maybe too good. The Marqueti family had routines. Maren knew them better than some relatives probably did. Victoria Marqueti preferred her coffee black, with exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar despite insisting she hated sweet things. Nico Marqueti always placed his documents on the right side of his desk, never the left. Salvatore Sal Greco left his jacket on every chair he sat in, as if chairs existed specifically to hold his clothes. Small things. Meaningless things. Except Maren knew small things were rarely meaningless. She had built an entire career around small things. Before she became a housekeeper, she had been a forensic accountant. She had spent years looking at numbers most people ignored, finding patterns, finding inconsistencies, finding the one detail everyone else missed. But that life belonged to someone else now. Maren had made sure of that. 5 years ago, she walked away. No more reports. No more investigations. No more late nights surrounded by financial records. No more trusting people who smiled while they destroyed everything you built. She didn't talk about that part of her life. Not with strangers. Not with coworkers. Not even with most friends. Her old life was a locked room. And she had thrown away the key. At least, that was what she told herself. By 9 in the morning, the estate had become busy. Fullness hung. Security staff moved through the halls. Employees delivered messages. The Marqueti family operated like a company. A very expensive, very private company. Maren entered Nico's office to replace the coffee and organize the room. She rarely touched anything beyond what was necessary. That was one of the first rules of working around powerful people. Respect their space. Respect their secrets. The office itself reflected Nico Marqueti perfectly. Minimal. Organized. Cold. Dark wood shelves lined the walls. A large window overlooked the city. Everything had a place. Everything except the papers on his desk. Maren placed the fresh coffee down. Then she noticed the documents. Only for a second. A corner of a page stuck out beneath a folder. She wasn't trying to read it. She didn't need to. Her eyes caught the numbers automatically. A habit. An annoying, impossible-to-kill habit. She looked away. Not your problem, she whispered. She reached for the papers and carefully aligned them. That was when she noticed something. The order was wrong. A page had been moved. A small mistake. Most people wouldn't see it. But Maren did. She stared at the documents for a moment. The date on one page didn't match the sequence of the following entries. A tiny inconsistency. Nothing important. Nothing she should care about. She stepped back. 5 years ago, she would have investigated. She would have grabbed a notebook. She would have spent hours finding the answer. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was a housekeeper. She cleaned rooms. She organized schedules. She made sure rich people had their coffee before they realized they wanted it. That was all. Maren left the office. But the numbers followed her. That evening, the Marqueti family hosted dinner. Not a party. Not a celebration. Something more serious. Maren had learned that wealthy families often used dinner tables the way other people used offices. Important conversations happened between expensive plates and carefully poured wine. She adjusted the silverware one final time. Everything was perfect. Almost. She noticed one chair was slightly out of position. She moved it 2 inches. Better. Do you always fix things before anyone notices? The voice behind her made her turn. Nico Marqueti stood in the doorway. For a moment, Maren simply looked at him. She had seen him before. Of course she had, but usually from a distance. The man who ran the Marqueti family was exactly what people expected. Tall, controlled, dangerously calm. He had the kind of presence that made conversation stop when he entered a room. Not because he demanded attention, because people gave it to him. Maren folded her hands. I suppose I do. His eyes moved briefly around the dining room. You worked here 3 months. Yes. You know everyone's habits. It wasn't a question. Maren smiled slightly. It helps me do my job. Nico studied her. Most people looked away when he looked at them. Maren didn't. Not because she was fearless. She had simply learned that powerful people were still people. They still got tired. They still got hurt. They still made mistakes. What do you think of this house? He asked. Maren considered the question. It's beautiful. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she answered honestly. It's quiet. Something changed slightly in his expression. Quiet. Yes. Is that bad? Maren glanced toward the empty hallway. Not always. She paused. But sometimes houses become quiet because people stop saying what they really think. The silence afterward was heavier. Nico looked at her differently. Not like staff. Not like someone passing through. Like he was trying to figure out something. You notice a lot. Maren shrugged. It's part of the job. A lie. A half-truth. But still a lie. Because noticing things was not her job. It was who she was. Before he could respond, someone called his name from the hallway. Nico looked away. Dinner starts in 10 minutes. I know. He nodded once. Then he walked away. Maren watched him leave. And for some reason, she had the strange feeling that the most dangerous man in the house had just noticed her for the first time. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Maren finished the final cleaning rounds. The estate was different after midnight. Less powerful. Less intimidating. Just a house. She walked past Nico's office. The door was slightly open. The light was still on. She should have kept walking. She knew that. Instead, she stopped. Not because she wanted to invade his privacy, because she saw the same folder from that morning, sitting on the desk, open. Maren hesitated. Then she stepped inside. Just one glance. That was all. One glance became two. Two became three. And then her expression changed. Because the mistake from earlier wasn't random. It appeared again. Different document. Same pattern. Maren slowly placed the paper back where she found it. Her heartbeat remained steady, but her mind was already working. Someone had changed numbers. Someone had hidden something. And the worst part was, she understood exactly what she was looking at. 4 or 5 years, Maren Kowalski had tried to convince herself that part of her was gone. The investigator, the accountant, the woman who could find the truth buried beneath layers of lies. But standing alone in the Marqueti office, staring at a problem nobody else had noticed, she realized something. That woman had never disappeared. She had only been waiting. And now she had found a reason to wake up. Nico Marqueti had learned a long time ago that power was not about being the loudest person in the room. His father had taught him that, not through advice, through example. Men who shouted were usually the ones afraid nobody would listen. The truly dangerous ones didn't need to raise their voices. They simply waited. And people adjusted themselves around them. At 38 years old, Nico had spent the last 3 years becoming someone he never intended to become. The head of the Marqueti family. The man everyone looked toward when something went wrong. The man responsible for every decision, every consequence, every mistake. He stood in the private office on the second floor of the estate, looking through the windows at Chicago's skyline. The city was beautiful from this height. Cold, distant, honest, unlike people. His phone vibrated on the desk. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. So, of course, Nico picked up. Tell me you have good news. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. Nico noticed everything. That was how he survived. Depends on what you consider good news, Sal answered. Nico closed his eyes briefly. Salvatore Greco had been his closest friend since childhood. Their fathers had worked together. Their families had grown up together. Sal was the person Nico trusted when he trusted almost no one, which was exactly why the hesitation bothered him. Try me. The shipment issue is worse than we thought. Nico looked down at the folder on his desk. Explain. 2 of the contracts we expected to clear this month are delayed. Why? Supplier problems. Nico leaned back in his chair. That's the 3rd time you've said that. Sal was quiet. Nico's jaw tightened. Sal, I'm handling it. That answer irritated him more than anything else. Because people only said I'm handling it when they didn't want someone asking more questions. Nico looked toward the city. Everything is handled until it isn't. I know. No. His voice remained calm, but the room felt colder. You don't know. Because if you did, you wouldn't be calling me at midnight telling me about another problem. Silence. Then Sal sighed. I'll fix it. Nico ended the call. Not because he was angry. Because he needed time to think. Anger was easy. Control was harder. And control was what kept his family alive. 3 years ago, his father died. Everyone had a different version of what happened after that. Some people said Nico stepped into power naturally. Some said he was born for it. Some said he was ruthless. They were all wrong. The truth was much simpler. He had no choice. When his father was gone, someone had to take responsibility. Someone had to protect the family. Someone had to make decisions other people were too afraid to make. Nico did what he had to do. And he had hated himself a little more every day afterward. Because the hardest part about becoming a leader was discovering how many parts of yourself you had to bury. Compassion, trust, hope. Things that made a person human. Things that made a person weak. At least, that was what everyone told him. The next morning, Nico arrived at the office earlier than usual. He always did. People assumed it was because he enjoyed working. The truth was different. He hated unfinished business. And lately, everything felt unfinished. He opened the folder from yesterday. The financial reports, the shipping records, the contracts. Something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong. That was the problem. If something was obvious, someone would have already found it. The Marqueti organization had survived for decades because they paid attention, because they understood people, because they knew weakness when they saw it. But lately, Nico felt like he was missing something. A piece of the puzzle. A name. A reason. He flipped through the pages again. Then he stopped. The order had been corrected. The documents were arranged differently. For a moment, he thought he had done it himself. But he hadn't. Nico didn't like surprises, especially inside his own house. He pressed a button on his phone. Anthony. Yes, Mr. Marqueti. Who entered my office yesterday? A pause. Only a second. But Nico heard it. Staff cleaned the room, sir. Who? Ms. Kowalski. The name meant nothing at first. Then he remembered. The housekeeper. The woman from dinner. The one who looked at him like he was a person instead of a title. Nico frowned. Send her to me. Maren found him in the office 15 minutes later. She stopped at the doorway. Mr. Marqueti? Nico gestured toward the chair. Seat? She looked at the chair, then at him. I'm working. It wasn't rude. Just honest. Something about that bothered him and interested him. Most people around him immediately changed their behavior. Maren didn't. You reorganized my files. Her expression didn't change. No. A simple answer. Too simple. Nico studied her. You're sure? Yes. Interesting. She tilted her head slightly. Why? Because they are organized differently than yesterday. Maren glanced toward the desk, then back at him. I cleaned your office. That wasn't my question. A small silence passed. Then she sighed. I moved the papers into the order they were already supposed to be in. Nico's eyes narrowed. Why? Because they were out of order. That's not your job. No. Her voice stayed calm. It isn't. Then why do it? For the first time, he saw something different in her expression. Not fear. Not guilt. Something closer to annoyance. Because it bothered me. Nico almost smiled. Almost. You rearranged confidential documents because they bothered you? When they're sitting incorrectly, yes. That's a strange reason. I've been called strange before. By who? Maren looked away for half a second. A tiny movement. But he noticed. People who didn't understand me. The answer was quiet. Too quiet. Nico looked back at the documents. You noticed something. It wasn't a question. Maren became still. There. That reaction. A fraction of hesitation. Anyone else would have missed it. Nico didn't. What did you notice? She looked at him. For a moment, he thought she might lie. Instead, she said, I noticed the numbers didn't line up. The room became silent. Nico stared at her. You're a housekeeper. Yes. And you noticed financial inconsistencies? Maren folded her hands. I used to work with numbers. How? Another pause. Then, accounting. Not the whole truth, but not completely false. Nico had spent years learning how people hid things. Maren was hiding something. The strange part was, he didn't think she was hiding it because she was dangerous. He thought she was hiding it because she was hurt. Why did you leave? The question came out before he could stop himself. Maren looked surprised. Not offended. Just surprised. That's a very personal question for someone asking about paperwork. Nico held her gaze. And you didn't answer. No. Why? A faint smile appeared on her face. Because I'm still deciding if you're asking as my employer. She stood. Just a house. She walked past Nico's office. The door was slightly open. The light was still on. She should have kept walking. She knew that. Instead, she stopped. Not because she wanted to invade his privacy. Because she saw the same folder from that morning. Sitting on the desk. Open. Maren hesitated. Then she stepped inside. Just one glance. That was all. One glance became two. Two became three. And then her expression changed. Because the mistake from earlier wasn't random. It appeared again. Different document. Same pattern. Maren slowly placed the paper back where she found it. Her heartbeat remained steady, but her mind was already working. Someone had changed numbers. Someone had hidden something. And the worst part was, she understood exactly what she was looking at. 4 or 5 years, Maren Kowalski had tried to convince herself that part of her was gone. The investigator. The accountant. The woman who could find the truth buried beneath layers of lies. But standing alone in the Marqueti office, staring at a problem nobody else had noticed, she realized something. That woman had never disappeared. She had only been waiting. And now she had found a reason to wake up. Nico Marqueti had learned a long time ago that power was not about being the loudest person in the room. His father had taught him that, not through advice, through example. Men who shouted were usually the ones afraid nobody would listen. The truly dangerous ones didn't need to raise their voices. They simply waited. And people adjusted themselves around them. At 38 years old, Nico had spent the last 3 years becoming someone he never intended to become. The head of the Marqueti family. The man everyone looked toward when something went wrong. The man responsible for every decision, every consequence, every mistake. He stood in the private office on the second floor of the estate, looking through the windows at Chicago's skyline. The city was beautiful from this height. Cold, distant, honest, unlike people. His phone vibrated on the desk. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. So, of course, Nico picked up. Tell me you have good news. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. Nico noticed everything. That was how he survived. Depends on what you consider good news, Sal answered. Nico closed his eyes briefly. Salvatore Greco had been his closest friend since childhood. Their fathers had worked together. Their families had grown up together. Sal was the person Nico trusted, but he trusted almost no one, which was exactly why the hesitation bothered him. Try me. The shipment issue is worse than we thought. Nico looked down at the folder on his desk. Explain. 2 of the contracts we expected to clear this month are delayed. Why? Supplier problems. Nico leaned back in his chair. That's the 3rd time you've said that. Sal was quiet. Nico's jaw tightened. Sal, I'm handling it. That answer irritated him more than anything else. Because people only said I'm handling it when they didn't want someone asking more questions. Nico looked toward the city. Everything is handled until it isn't. I know. No. His voice remained calm, but the room felt colder. You don't know. Because if you did, you wouldn't be calling me at midnight telling me about another problem. Silence. Lynn said sight. I'll fix it. Nico ended the call. Not because he was angry. Because he needed time to think. Anger was easy. Control was harder. And control was what kept his family alive. 3 years ago, his father died. Everyone had a different version of what happened after that. Some people said Nico stepped into power naturally. Some said he was born for it. Some said he was ruthless. They were all wrong. The truth was much simpler. He had no choice. When his father was gone, someone had to take responsibility. Someone had to protect the family. Someone had to make decisions other people were too afraid to make. Nico did what he had to do. And he had hated himself a little more every day afterward. Because the hardest part about becoming a leader was discovering how many parts of yourself you had to bury. Compassion, trust, hope, things that made a person human, things that made a person weak. At least, that was what everyone told him. The next morning, Nico arrived at the office earlier than usual. He always did. People assumed it was because he enjoyed working. The truth was different. He hated unfinished business. And lately, everything felt unfinished. He opened the folder from yesterday. The financial reports. The shipping records. The contracts. Something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong. That was the problem. If something was obvious, someone would have already found it. The Marqueti organization had survived for decades because they paid attention. Because they understood people. Because they knew weakness when they saw it. But lately, Nico felt like he was missing something. A piece of the puzzle. A name. A reason. He flipped through the pages again. Then he stopped. The order had been corrected. The documents were arranged differently. For a moment, he thought he had done it himself. But he hadn't. Nico didn't like surprises, especially inside his own house. He pressed a button on his phone. Anthony. Yes, Mr. Marqueti. Who entered my office yesterday? A pause. Only a second. But Nico heard it. Staff cleaned the room, sir. Who? Ms. Kowalski. The name meant nothing at first. Then he remembered. The housekeeper. The woman from dinner. The one who looked at him like he was a person instead of a title. Nico frowned. Send her to me. Maren found him in the office 15 minutes later. She stopped at the doorway. Mr. Marqueti? Nico gestured toward the chair. Sit. She looked at the chair, then at him. I'm working. It wasn't rude. Just honest. Something about that bothered him and interested him. Most people around him immediately changed their behavior. Maren didn't. You reorganized my files. Her expression didn't change. No. A simple answer. Too simple. Nico studied her. You're sure? Yes. Interesting. She tilted her head slightly. Why? Because they are organized differently than yesterday. Maren glanced toward the desk, then back at him. I cleaned your office. That wasn't my question. A small silence passed. Then she sighed. I moved the papers into the order they were already supposed to be in. Nico's eyes narrowed. Why? Because they were out of order. That's not your job. No. Her voice stayed calm. It isn't. Then why do it? For the first time, he saw something different in her expression. Not fear. Not guilt. Something closer to annoyance. Because it bothered me. Nico almost smiled. Almost. You rearranged confidential documents because they bothered you? When they're sitting incorrectly, yes. That's a strange reason. I've been called strange before. By who? Maren looked away for half a second. A tiny movement. But he noticed. People who didn't understand me. The answer was quiet. Too quiet. Nico looked back at the documents. You noticed something. It wasn't a question. Maren became still. There. That reaction. A fraction of hesitation. Anyone else would have missed it. Nico didn't. What did you notice? She looked at him. For a moment he thought she might lie. Instead, she said, I noticed the numbers didn't line up. The room became silent. Nico stared at her. You're a housekeeper. Yes. And you noticed financial inconsistencies? Maren folded her hands. I used to work with numbers. How? Another pause. Then, accounting. Not the whole truth, but not completely false. Nico had spent years learning how people hid things. Maren was hiding something. The strange part was, he didn't think she was hiding it because she was dangerous. He thought she was hiding it because she was hurt. Why did you leave? The question came out before he could stop himself. Maren looked surprised. Not offended. Just surprised. That's a very personal question for someone asking about paperwork. Nico held her gaze. And you didn't answer. No. Why? A faint smile appeared on her face. Because I'm still deciding if you're asking as my employer, she stood. Or because you're actually curious. For the first time in a long time, Nico didn't have an immediate response. She walked toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped. Mr. Marqueti? Yes. If you think there's a problem with those documents. She looked back at him. Don't assume the person who notices the problem is the person who caused it. Then she left. Nico remained still. The room felt strangely quiet. On the desk in front of him were pages filled with numbers. Numbers he had looked at dozens of times. Numbers his own people had reviewed. Numbers nobody questioned. Except her. The woman everyone ignored. The housekeeper. The invisible person in his home. Nico looked toward the closed door. For the first time in years, he wondered what else the people around him were failing to see. And why the one person who noticed everything. was the person nobody had bothered to notice at all. Maren Kowalski had learned that wealthy families had a very specific way of making people feel small. They rarely did it intentionally. That was the interesting part. A person could insult you directly, and at least you knew where you stood. But wealth had a quieter language. The expensive paintings on the walls. The conversations that stopped when you entered a room. The assumption that anyone wearing a uniform existed only to make their lives easier. Maren had spent enough time around powerful people to recognize the difference between being respected and being tolerated. The Marqueti family tolerated her. At least, that was what it felt like. And she was fine with that. Most days, she had survived worse things than being invisible. The morning after Nico Marqueti questioned her about the documents, Maren arrived at the estate exactly 6 minutes earlier than scheduled. Not because she was nervous. She refused to be nervous. Because being nervous around powerful people was how people made mistakes. And Maren had spent years learning not to make mistakes. She entered through the service entrance, placed her bag in the employee area, and immediately noticed something was different. The atmosphere. The staff moved faster. Conversations were shorter. Everyone seemed aware that something had happened. She didn't need to ask. In houses like this, information traveled faster than electricity, especially when nobody was willing to speak openly. "Morning," Anthony said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. Maren glanced at him. Something happened. It wasn't a question. "Anthony sighed. You really do notice everything, don't you?" She smiled slightly. "Occupational hazard." He looked at her for a moment. "You should be careful with that." The warning was quiet. Maren understood. Not because Anthony explained. Because she knew this world. Not the criminal side. Not the family business. But the human side. People with power rarely like being reminded that someone else was paying attention. "Only clean rooms," she said. Anthony gave her a knowing look. Of course. By noon, the reason for the tension became clear. The family accountant had resigned. Or, according to the official explanation, he had taken unexpected medical leave. Maren heard the news while replacing towels in the upstairs hallway. 2 employees were speaking quietly near the kitchen. "Do you think he'll come back?" "I don't know. He looked terrified yesterday." Maren paused. Only briefly. Then continued walking. She had no interest in family drama. At least, she told herself she didn't. But there was something about the situation that bothered her. Not the resignation. People quit jobs every day. Not the medical leave. People got sick. It was the timing. She hated timing. Timing revealed patterns. And patterns revealed truth. A few hours later, she saw Nico enter the main hallway. He looked exactly the same as always. Perfect suit. Calm expression. Controlled movements. But Maren noticed the difference. The space around him felt heavier. People stepped aside. Not because they feared him. Because they knew he carried responsibility. She understood that feeling. More than she wanted to admit. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Maren was instructed to remain available, but out of sight. Which, honestly, was how she usually existed in the house. Present, but unnoticed. She stood near the dining room entrance while Marqueti family took their seats. Victoria Marqueti sat at the head of one side of the table. Elegant, precise. The kind of woman who could make a person feel underdressed without saying a single word. Nico sat across from her. Sal Greco sat beside him. Sal was charming in a way that Nico was not. Where Nico created silence, Sal filled it. He smiled easily. He joked. He remembered people's names. Maren understood why people trusted him. Sometimes the most dangerous people weren't the cold ones. Sometimes they were the ones who made you comfortable. "Dinner looks excellent," Victoria said. "Thank you," the chef replied. Then everyone began eating. Maren turned slightly, preparing to leave. That was when Victoria spoke. "Wait." Maren stopped. "Yes, Mrs. Marqueti?" Victoria looked toward the table. "There is a scheduling issue tomorrow." Maren waited. "Nico has a meeting at 2, but the driver was told 3. Anthony looked confused. "That's impossible." "I confirmed." "I know it was confirmed," Victoria interrupted. Her tone wasn't cruel, just sharp. Maren looked toward the calendar folder beside Anthony. Something bothered her. A small detail. She walked closer. If I may. The room became quiet. Maren immediately realized she had stepped slightly beyond her usual role. Victoria looked at her. You may. Maren opened the folder. The driver's schedule is correct. Anthony frowned. Excuse me. The meeting time changed this morning. She pointed to the page. The original appointment was at 3. It was moved forward to 2:45. Nico looked at her. How do you know that? Maren looked down. The email confirmation was printed this afternoon. Silence. Sal leaned back. And you noticed that? Maren shrugged. It was on the printer tray. Victoria looked at the paper. Then at Anthony. Then back at Maren. You read family documents? The question carried weight. Maren remained calm. No. A pause. I noticed a schedule change. That answer was careful. Very careful. Nico watched her. He recognized what she was doing. She was answering the question without giving away anything unnecessary. That was not something an ordinary housekeeper did. Victoria studied her. You're very observant. Maren smiled politely. I try to be good at my job. Sal laughed softly. Well, she might be the most qualified housekeeper we've ever had. The comment sounded like a compliment. But something about it bothered Maren. Maybe because it was said like a joke. Like her intelligence was surprising coming from someone in her position. She simply smiled. Maybe I am. For a second, Sal's expression changed. Only slightly. But she saw it. Interest. Not appreciation. Calculation. Then Nico spoke. Thank you, Maren. Her eyes moved toward him. It was a simple sentence. But something about hearing it from him felt different. Because Nico Marqueti didn't thank people casually. Not from what she had observed. She nodded. You're welcome. Then she left the room. Later that night, Maren sat in her small apartment in Bridgeport. The contrast between her home and the Marqueti estate was almost ridiculous. The estate had rooms nobody used. She had a kitchen small enough that she could touch both counters at once. They owned artwork worth more than her entire building. She owned a second-hand bookshelf and a coffee machine she refused to replace because it still worked. And somehow, she preferred her apartment. It was honest. No expectations. No pretending. She removed her earrings and placed them on the table. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Diane, her oldest friend. The only person who knew the truth about her past. Maren answered. You're calling late. I know. Diane's voice immediately told her something was wrong. You sound tired. I work for rich people. That's normal. Maren. She sighed. Diane always knew when she was avoiding something. What? You're doing it again. Doing what? Pretending you don't care. Maren looked out the window. Chicago lights reflected across the glass. I'm fine. That's what you said 5 years ago. The words hit harder than she expected. Maren didn't answer. Diane softened. Are you happy there? Maren thought about the mansion, the quiet hallways, the family, Nico, the way he looked at her like he was trying to solve a mystery. I don't know. That's not an answer. No. Maren smiled faintly. It's the honest one. After hanging up, she sat in silence. Then she opened her laptop. She didn't know why. She told herself she was only checking emails, only organizing personal files, only doing normal things. But eventually, without realizing it, she opened an old folder, the one she hadn't touched in years. Her old accounting records, her old reports, her old life. Maren stared at the screen. Then she whispered, just because you can find a problem. She closed the folder. Doesn't mean you should. But somewhere deep inside, she already knew. The Marqueti family had a problem. And whether she wanted it or not, she had already started looking for the answer. Maren Kowalski had always believed numbers were honest. People weren't. Numbers didn't smile at you while hiding something. They didn't promise loyalty and then disappear when things became inconvenient. They didn't tell you one story while quietly building another. Numbers simply existed. They either matched or they didn't. That was why she had trusted them. Years ago, when she worked as a forensic accountant, numbers had been the only thing in her life that never betrayed her. Until people used numbers to hide their betrayal. That was the part she tried not to remember. The reason she left. The reason she stopped wearing tailored suits and carrying a laptop full of financial reports. The reason she traded conference rooms for kitchens, corporate offices for marble floors she had to polish. She told herself she was happier this way. Quieter life. A smaller life. A life where nobody expected her to uncover things that powerful people wanted hidden. But the problem with old habits was simple. You could leave a career. You could change your clothes. You could change your address. But you couldn't always change who you were. 3 days after the family dinner, the atmosphere inside the Marqueti estate became even more tense. Maren noticed it the moment she arrived. The security staff were more alert. The conversations between employees were shorter. The usual rhythm of the house had changed. It was subtle, but she felt it. A house always changed when the people inside it were worried. She was organizing the library shelves when she heard voices coming from the hallway. She didn't intend to listen. She really didn't. But when people lowered their voices, it usually meant they were discussing something important. I'm telling you, something is wrong. That was Sal Greco. His voice was calm, almost relaxed. Too relaxed. Maren paused. Not close enough to hear everything. Just enough to understand the tone. Another voice answered. Nico. I asked for solutions, not explanations. A silence followed. Then Sal spoke again. I'm working on it. Those words again. Maren looked down at the book in her hand. I'm working on it. A phrase people used when they wanted someone powerful to stop asking questions. She placed the book back on the shelf, then continued organizing. Whatever was happening was not her business. She repeated that to herself several times. By afternoon, the situation reached the staff. The family accountant, Mr. Bellini, had officially resigned. Nobody said much. They didn't need to. The suddenness of it said enough. Mr. Bellini had worked for the Marqueti family for almost 15 years. People didn't leave positions like that without a reason. Maren was replacing linens in one of the guest rooms when she saw Anthony carrying a box from the office. She frowned. Is that his? Anthony looked surprised. You noticed. Maren gave him a look. You're carrying a box through the hallway. He almost smiled. Fair point. She hesitated. Is he coming back? Anthony's expression changed. A small shadow crossed his face. I don't know. That answer bothered her. Because Anthony always knew. He was the kind of person who remembered everything. Birthdays. Appointments. Which guest preferred which wine. If Anthony didn't know something, it usually meant someone had made sure he didn't. That evening, Nico arrived home later than usual. Maren noticed immediately. She hated that she noticed. But she did. His usual schedule was precise. Dinner at 7:30. Office until 11. Occasionally later. Tonight he arrived close to midnight. His tie was loosened. His expression was unchanged. But there was something different. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying something too heavy alone. Maren was in the kitchen preparing tea when he walked in. They both stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. It was strange. They had spoken before, but always briefly. Always about work. This felt different. You're still here. Nico's voice was quiet. Maren looked at the clock. I work here. That wasn't what I meant. She glanced at him, then continued pouring the tea. I know. The answer seemed to surprise him. Nico leaned against the counter. You always understand more than people say. Maren handed him the cup. That can be a problem. Why? Because sometimes people don't like being understood. His eyes stayed on hers. There it was again. That feeling. Like he was looking past the uniform. Past the role. Trying to figure out who she really was. You noticed the problem before anyone else. Maren looked away. I noticed something unusual. That's a careful answer. I'm a careful person. Nico was quiet. Then, why? She looked back at him. What? Why are you careful? The question was unexpected. Personal. Too personal. Maren smiled slightly. You ask a lot of questions for someone who doesn't like answering them. A faint change appeared in his expression. Almost amusement. Almost. That's not an answer. No. She stepped back. It's not. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nico looked down at the tea. Thank you. You're welcome. She walked away. But this time she noticed something. He drank the tea. All of it. The next morning, Nico called her into his office. Maren knew immediately something had changed. People didn't usually invite housekeepers into private offices, especially not twice in 1 week. She entered and found him standing beside the desk. Several folders were open. Not casually. Deliberately. Maren. She waited. I need your opinion. That sentence alone surprised her. You hired me to clean. Yes. So I assume you don't want my opinion on dust. A small pause. Then, unexpectedly, Nico almost smiled. Almost. No. He moved one of the folders toward her. I want your opinion on this. Maren didn't touch it. Not yet. Because the moment she did, she knew something would change. Mr. Marqueti. Nico. The correction was immediate. She looked at him. What? If you're going to help me, you can call me Nico. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Maren looked at the folder, then back at him. This isn't part of my job. No. Then why ask me? Because I trust you. The thought appeared in Nico's mind before he could stop it. He didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, he answered, because you saw something nobody else saw. Maren stared at him. She should have refused. That would have been the smart choice. The safe choice. The choice she had spent 5 years making. But then she looked at the documents, and the part of her she had buried started waking up. Slowly, quietly, like it had been waiting. She opened the folder. The first page, then the second, then the third. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Maren was too controlled for that. But Nico saw it. The moment she found something. What? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved across the page. This isn't an accident. The room became still. Nico's expression hardened. What do you mean? Maren looked up. I mean, she closed the folder. Someone wants it to look like a mistake. Nico stared at her. And you know that because... Maren hesitated. Because telling him the truth meant opening a door she had kept locked for 5 years. Because once she admitted who she used to be, she could never become invisible again. Finally, she said, because mistakes are messy. Her fingers rested on the folder. This isn't messy. She looked at him. It's organized. For the first time in years, Nico Marqueti looked genuinely surprised. Not because she had found a problem, but because she had understood it. And Maren realized something at that moment. She had spent 5 years running away from the part of herself that could uncover the truth. But now the truth had found her first, and it was waiting inside the Marqueti house. Maren Kowalski had spent 5 years convincing herself that curiosity was a dangerous thing. Curiosity was how people got involved. Curiosity was how people crossed lines. Curiosity was how someone like her ended up standing in the middle of problems that belonged to people far more powerful than she was. She knew better. She had learned that lesson the hardest possible way. And yet, here she was, sitting in the private office of Nico Marqueti, a man whose family name carried enough weight to silence entire rooms. And she was looking through his financial records. Not because she wanted money. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted to prove she was smarter than anyone else. She was doing it because something was wrong. And Maren had never been good at ignoring wrong things. That had always been her weakness, or her strength. She had never figured out which. Nico stood across from the desk, watching her carefully. Maren noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. The way he stood. The way his shoulders remained relaxed, even though his entire body was prepared for a threat. The way he never touched anything on his desk while waiting for her answer. A person who controlled himself that much usually had a reason. You can stop staring, she said. Nico's eyebrows lifted slightly. I wasn't aware I was staring. You were. And how would you know? Maren turned another page. Because you stopped blinking. For a moment, silence filled the office. Then something unexpected happened. Nico smiled. Barely. A small movement at the corner of his mouth. But it was there. Maren looked up. There. What? You smiled. I did not. You did. No. She looked back at the papers. That's interesting. What is? For someone who scares half the city, you're surprisingly bad at lying. The silence afterward was different. Not uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. Most people did not speak to Nico Marqueti like that. Maren knew it. And judging by his expression, he knew it too. You always talk like this. Like what? Like you're not aware who you're talking to. Maren closed the folder. I'm aware. Then why? She thought about the question. Because the answer was complicated. Because fear had once controlled too much of her life. Because she spent years trying to survive people who smiled while destroying her. Because intimidation stopped working on her a long time ago. Finally, she said, because you're still a person. Something shifted in his expression. Only slightly, but she saw it. The answer had reached somewhere she hadn't expected. For the next 2 hours, they worked. Together. The strangest part was how natural it felt. Nico asked questions. Maren answered. She pointed out inconsistencies. He listened. Not politely. Actually listened. That was rare. Very rare. Powerful people often ask for opinions because they wanted confirmation. Nico asked because he wanted the truth. That difference mattered. Maren traced a line on the document. Here. Nico leaned closer. What? This payment. He looked at the page. What about it? It appears normal. Appears. Yes. She tapped the paper lightly. But the timing is strange. Nico studied the document. Explain. Maren stopped herself. The old instinct returned. The instinct to explain everything. To teach. To prove. She slowed down. There are certain things people do when they want records to look normal. Nico watched her. You sound like you've seen this before. The question landed exactly where she expected. Maren became quiet. Because this was the moment. The moment where she could continue pretending. Or open the door. She chose neither. Not yet. I've worked with financial records. That's not the whole answer. No. His eyes narrowed. You know, most people lie by adding too much. Maren looked at him. What? They give unnecessary details. They try to convince you. You don't do that. Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper. You're very observant, too. I have to be. The answer came immediately. And somehow she believed him. That evening, Maren stayed late. Again. She told herself it was temporary. Just until they understood the problem. Just until Nico knew what he was dealing with. Just until she could walk away. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The moment Nico asked for her help, she stopped being invisible. And that was dangerous. Because once people saw you, they could also hurt you. At 11:30, she walked through the quiet hallway carrying a stack of documents. The estate was dark, silent, almost peaceful. Then she heard voices from the study. She stopped. Not because she wanted to listen. Because she heard her name. The housekeeper. It was Sal. Maren stayed still. Nico answered. Yes. What exactly do you know about her? Maren's heartbeat slowed. She hated that. Because her first instinct was not fear. It was curiosity. Sal continued. She worked for a cleaning company before this. I know. That's all. Silence. Then Nico said, she sees things. Maren looked down. For some reason, those words affected her more than she expected. Not because they were threatening. Because they were true. Sal laughed softly. That can be dangerous. Nico's voice became colder. She helped us find a problem. And if she becomes a problem, the hallway seemed colder. Maren waited. She didn't know why. Maybe she wanted to know what Nico would say. Maybe she needed to know. Finally, he answered. She won't. A simple sentence. Certain. Maren slowly stepped away before they could notice her. She returned the documents to the office. Then she stood alone in the empty room. She should have been angry. She should have been offended. Instead, she felt something far more confusing. Relief. Because for the first time in years, someone had believed her. Not because of what she could do. Not because of what she could provide. But because they trusted what they saw. And that was exactly what scared her. Because trust was the one thing Maren Kowalski no longer knew how to accept. Chapter 5 continued in the next part. Maren left the hallway before she could hear anything else. That was the smart thing to do. She had spent enough years learning when to walk away. The old version of herself, the woman who had spent nights buried beneath spreadsheets and corporate reports, would have stayed. She would have listened. She would have collected every word, every hesitation, every inconsistency. She would have built a picture before anyone realized she was painting one. But that woman had paid a price. A very high one. So Maren returned to the guest wing, finished her final tasks, and went home. At least, she told herself that was what she was doing. Going home. Not running away. Not avoiding. Just going home. Her apartment was small compared to the Marqueti estate. Almost laughably small. The first time she returned after working at the mansion, the contrast had felt almost ridiculous. The Marqueti family had rooms they rarely entered. Maren had a living room where her couch, dining table, and workspace all shared the same few feet of space. They had crystal glasses stored behind glass cabinets. She had 3 mismatched coffee mugs because she refused to throw away perfectly good ones. They lived surrounded by history. She lived surrounded by things she had chosen herself. And somehow she liked that. Her apartment did not ask questions. It did not care who she used to be. It did not care who she failed. It simply existed. Maren placed her keys on the counter and removed her shoes. For a few minutes, she stood in silence. Then she made coffee. A habit. A ritual. Something normal. She sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the wall. She should sleep. She had work in the morning. Instead, she opened her laptop. Not the work files. Not anything connected to the Marqueti family. Just her personal folder. A mistake. She knew it immediately. The folder had been untouched for years. Inside were old documents, certificates, employment records, photographs, things from another life. A life where people called her brilliant. Before they called her difficult. Before they called her a problem. Before they decided the easiest way to protect themselves was to make her the person everyone blamed. Her fingers hovered over one file. Kowalski Forensic Review. Final report. She closed the folder. No. The word came out quietly, almost like she was speaking to another person. She shut the laptop. But the memories were already awake. 5 years earlier, Maren had believed intelligence was enough. She believed if you worked hard, followed the rules, and told the truth, people would respect that. She had been young enough to believe honesty was a shield. Then she learned honesty was only a shield if powerful people allowed it to be. The investigation that ended her career had started like any other. A company with suspicious financial records. Missing information. Numbers that didn't match. She had found the problem. She had done exactly what she was trained to do. The mistake was believing the truth would matter more than protecting the people involved. Her mentor had abandoned her. Her fiancé had lied to her. The company executives had turned the entire situation around until somehow she became the person responsible. The woman who was too aggressive. The woman who misunderstood. The woman who made accusations without evidence. She remembered standing in that conference room. Everyone around the table had looked at her like she was the problem. Nobody asked why the numbers were wrong. They asked why she noticed. That was the moment something inside her broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A door closing, a decision. Never again. The next morning, Maren arrived at the Marqueti estate earlier than usual. She told herself she came early because she liked being prepared. Not because she had barely slept. Not because she kept thinking about Nico saying, she won't become a problem. Not because she wondered why his trust mattered. She was halfway through preparing breakfast arrangements when Victoria Marqueti entered the kitchen. Maren immediately noticed something unusual. Victoria rarely came into staff areas. Not because she was arrogant. Because she simply belonged in a different world. People like Victoria moved through homes. They didn't work inside them. Ms. Kowalski. Maren turned. Mrs. Marqueti. Victoria looked around the kitchen. Then at her. You have been here several months. Yes. And you have never caused an issue. Maren waited. She knew better than to answer a statement that was probably leading somewhere. Victoria continued. That is unusual. I try to avoid causing problems. Victoria studied her. No. The older woman's voice was calm. You try to solve them before anyone knows they exist. Maren said nothing. That was usually the safest response. Victoria stepped closer. I owe you an apology. That surprised her. Not because Victoria was cruel. Actually, Victoria had never been openly cruel. She was simply distant. There was a difference. For what? For assuming you were only what I saw. Maren looked at her. The words were simple, but they carried meaning. Because that was the thing about people like Maren. They were often reduced to one thing. Employee, woman, body, background. People looked at what was easiest to categorize, not what was actually there. Thank you, Maren said. Victoria nodded. Then, after a moment, Nico trusts very few people. Maren looked away. I'm sure he has his reasons. He does. A pause. And that makes his judgment important. Maren understood what Victoria was saying. A warning, and perhaps a compliment. Both at once. That seemed to be how the Marqueti family communicated. Later that afternoon, Nico called her into his office again. This time, there was no surprise. Only tension. The moment she entered, she knew something had happened. What happened? Nico looked at her. You always start with that. When someone looks like they haven't slept in 2 days, a pause. Usually something happened. He looked away. A small reaction. But she noticed. Mr. Bellini was found unconscious at home. Maren became still. Is he okay? He's alive. The relief she felt surprised her. She barely knew the man. But nobody deserved to become a victim of someone else's secrets. The doctors say stress may have contributed. May have. Nico's jaw tightened. They aren't certain. Maren looked at the documents on his desk. Then at him. Someone wanted him gone. Nico didn't answer. That was answer enough. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between employer and employee felt smaller than before. But the danger around them felt larger. Maren. She looked at him. This is no longer just about paperwork. She nodded slowly. I know. You can walk away. The words surprised her. Not because he said them. Because he meant them. You're giving me a choice? Yes. Why? Nico held her gaze. Because if you stay, you need to understand something. His voice lowered. You won't be invisible anymore. The sentence landed harder than she expected. Because that was exactly what she had wanted for 5 years. To disappear. To become someone nobody noticed. Someone nobody could hurt. But now she stood in front of a man who was telling her the opposite. You think being seen is dangerous? Nico's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Yes. Maren studied him. Then why do you do it? What? Why do you let everyone see you? A long silence followed. Then Nico answered. Because someone has to carry the weight. For the first time, Maren saw beyond a reputation. Beyond the name. Beyond the power. She saw a man who was exhausted from holding everything together. And she understood something she did not expect. Nico Marqueti was not cold because he lacked feelings. He was cold because he had too many. That night, Maren opened the ledger again. Not because Nico asked. Not because she had to, because she had made a decision, a dangerous one. She was going to find the truth. But this time, she would not be the woman hiding behind numbers. She would be the woman standing beside them. And somewhere inside the Marqueti organization, someone had made a mistake. They had created a pattern. They had left evidence. And worst of all, they had underestimated the one person in the house who knew how to find it. End of Chapter 5. Maren Kowalski had learned something important about powerful families. They did not fall apart loudly. They cracked quietly. From the outside, the Marqueti family still looked untouchable. The newspapers saw a successful Chicago business empire. Luxury buildings, transportation companies, construction projects, a family name that had existed for generations. People saw the polished surface. They saw the expensive suits, the private meetings, the carefully controlled public image. They did not see what happened behind closed doors. The long silences, the unanswered questions, the people who stopped making eye contact, the tension sitting at the dinner table like an unwanted guest. Maren saw it because she was always there, and because she had spent years learning that the truth rarely announced itself. It whispered. For the next several days, Maren and Nico worked together. Quietly, carefully. Neither of them talked about what it meant. Neither of them acknowledged that a line had shifted. She was still an employee. He was still her employer. That was the simple version, the safer version. But nothing about the situation was simple anymore. Every evening after her regular duties were finished, Maren went to Nico's office. They reviewed documents. Not all of them. Only the ones that concerned the irregularities they had already discovered. Nico was cautious. That impressed her. Many powerful men believed confidence meant rushing forward. Nico understood something different. Confidence meant knowing when to wait. You're thinking too loudly. Maren looked up from the papers. I'm sorry. Nico sat across from her, reading another report. You have a certain expression when you find something. What expression? Like you're arguing with a page. She looked down, then back at him. I didn't realize pages could argue back. They can't. Then I'm winning. For a moment, silence. Then Nico's mouth moved slightly. Another almost smile. Maren noticed. Again. You do that often. What? Almost smile. I don't. You do. He looked back at the document. You're very confident about things you shouldn't know. And you're very confident about things you clearly do. That earned her another brief look. Not irritation. Something else. Curiosity. The strange thing was that Nico Marqueti was not what Maren expected. Before working at the estate, she had heard enough rumors. Everyone had. The Marqueti family was powerful, dangerous, private. People lowered their voices when they said the name. But the man sitting across from her did not feel like a monster. He felt like someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person. That did not make him innocent. Maren was not naive. She understood the world she had stepped into. But she also understood people were rarely as simple as the stories told about them. The first real breakthrough came on a Thursday night. Maren was reviewing several invoices when she noticed something familiar. Company name. Not once. Not twice. Repeated. She leaned closer. What is it? Nico noticed immediately. Maren pointed at the page. This supplier. Nico looked down. What about it? I've seen it before. Where? Another report. He reached for the folder. Show me. She placed the documents side by side. Different months. Different transactions. Same company. Same pattern. Nico's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What does that tell you? Maren hesitated, because she knew what it told her. And she knew saying it aloud changed everything. It tells me someone wanted these transactions to look unrelated. Nico looked at her. Meaning whoever arranged them expected nobody to compare them. The room became quiet. Nico leaned back. Could it be a coincidence? Maren looked at him. Yes, a pause. But I wouldn't bet on it. He studied her. You don't make accusations easily. No. Why? Because accusations destroy people. The answer came faster than she expected. Nico noticed. Maren looked away. I've seen what happens when people decide they're right before they have proof. For a second, he saw something in her face. Something old. Something painful. But before he could ask, his phone rang. The name on the screen changed his expression. Victoria. He answered. Yes. Maren watched him listen. Whatever he heard, he didn't like. I'll be there. He ended the call. What happened? Family meeting. She nodded. About this? Yes. Maren began gathering the documents. But Nico stopped her. No. She looked at him. No. You're coming. The statement surprised her. I thought I was the invisible employee. You were. The way he said it made her pause. Was. Nico looked at her. Not anymore. The family meeting took place in the formal dining room. The same room where Maren had adjusted silverware weeks earlier. The same room where she had first spoken more than necessary. Only this time the atmosphere was different. Everyone knew something was wrong. Victoria sat at the table. Sal beside Nico. Several senior members of the organization were present. Maren remained standing. She immediately felt the difference. She was the only person in the room without a family name, without history, without power. Victoria noticed. Sit down, Maren. The room went quiet. Maren looked at her. Mrs. Marqueti, you heard me. A small gesture. A simple chair. But it meant something. She sat. Sal smiled. Well. His voice was friendly. Too friendly. This is new. Maren looked at him. What is? A housekeeper sitting in family meetings. Nico's expression hardened slightly. She's here because she has information. Sal raised his hands. Of course. The words sounded harmless. But Maren noticed the tone. People often reveal themselves through what they pretended not to mean. Victoria opened the folder. We need to understand how serious this is. Nico nodded. Maren believed someone inside the organization manipulated records. The room changed. Not dramatically, but enough. People stopped moving, stopped breathing normally. The idea itself was dangerous, because families like the Marquetis survived through one thing: trust. And betrayal was always the most dangerous enemy. Sal leaned back. Based on what? Maren looked at him. Patterns. That's not proof. No. She agreed calmly. It isn't. That surprised him. She continued. That's why I'm not accusing anyone. A pause. I'm saying someone created inconsistencies, and we need to find out why. Victoria watched her carefully. You understand the seriousness of what you're saying? Yes. And you're still willing to continue? Maren looked around the table. Then at Nico. 5 years ago, she would have left. She would have protected herself. But something had changed. Maybe because someone had finally believed her. Maybe because she was tired of running. Yes. Her voice was steady. I am. After the meeting ended, Nico found her outside the room. You didn't have to do that. Maren looked at him. Do what? Stand there. She smiled faintly. I've stood in worse rooms. That answer caught him. What does that mean? Maren looked away. It means I'm not as fragile as people assume. Nico was quiet. Then, I never thought you were fragile. The words were simple. But they stayed with her. Because she believed him. And that was becoming dangerous. Later that night, Sal Greco stood alone in his office. The friendly expression was gone. The charm disappeared. He looked at the documents in front of him. Then at the photograph of the Marqueti family on his desk. For years, he had been the person Nico trusted most. The person standing beside him. The person nobody questioned. Until now. Until a woman nobody noticed started looking at the numbers. Sal picked up his phone. We have a problem. A pause. No. His eyes moved toward the window. It's not Nico. Another pause. It's the housekeeper. He ended the call. And for the first time since she entered the Marqueti estate, Maren Kowalski was no longer invisible. Someone had finally seen her. And that person did not like what she could see. End of chapter 6. Nico Marqueti had spent most of his life learning one important lesson. Trust was not something you gave. It was something people earned. And even then, it could disappear in a single moment. His father had taught him that without ever saying the words. In their world, loyalty was praised more than honesty. Because honesty was simple. Anyone could tell the truth when it benefited them. Loyalty was different. Loyalty was what remained when the truth became inconvenient. That was why Sal Greco had always mattered. Sal had been there since they were children. Before the money, before the responsibility, before Nico became the man everyone feared. He had been the one person Nico believed would never turn against him. Until recently. Now there was a woman in his house who had known him for only a few weeks. A woman who had no reason to care about his family. No history with him. No obligation. And somehow, she had been more honest with him than almost everyone he had known. That unsettled him, more than he wanted to admit. The morning after the family meeting, Nico stood in front of the large windows of his office, watching Chicago wake up. The city moved below him. Cars, people, life. Everyone carrying something invisible. Everyone pretending they weren't tired. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. For several seconds, he simply watched the name. Then answered. Yes, we need to talk. Nico heard the difference immediately. Sal's voice was controlled, but not relaxed. What happened? You're trusting her. It wasn't a question. Nico's expression hardened. If you're talking about Maren, I am. Then choose your next words carefully. Silence. That was the thing about old friendships. They created a dangerous comfort. People forgot they were speaking to someone who had changed. You barely know her, Sal said. I know enough. That's not like you. Nico looked down. What does that mean? You don't bring strangers into family matters. She isn't involved because I wanted her involved. No. Sal's voice carried something Nico didn't like. Suspicion. She just happened to find something everyone else missed. Nico said nothing. Because that was exactly what bothered him too. Not because he doubted Maren. Because he wondered why she had spent so long hiding what she could do. Everyone hid something. Including him. Be careful, Sal said. Nico's eyes narrowed. Are you warning me about her? I'm warning you about everyone. The answer sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. And that was the problem. Sal was always reasonable. Always calm. Always convincing. Nico had trusted that. Maybe too much. I'll handle it, Nico said. The same words Sal had used. But they sounded different coming from him. Because Nico meant them. He ended the call. Maren noticed something had changed. She couldn't explain how. She just knew. People often underestimated intuition. They thought intuition was some mysterious feeling. It wasn't. It was information collected faster than conscious thought. A pause. A glance. A change in someone's voice. A door closing slightly harder than usual. Maren had spent years training herself to notice. And now she noticed Nico was quieter. Not colder. That was different. Colder meant distance. Quiet meant thinking. She found him in the library that afternoon. Not working. Just standing there. That alone was unusual. You're hiding from your office. Nico looked at her. I'm thinking. Same thing for some people. A faint expression crossed his face. You always make observations like that? Only when they're true. He looked back toward the bookshelves. You know, most people avoid telling me things they think I won't like. Maren leaned against the doorway. Maybe they're afraid. They should be. The answer came too quickly. Maren studied him. That's not what you believe. Nico looked at her. You think you know what I believe? No. She smiled slightly. I think you want people to believe that's what you think. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, you're very difficult to understand. That's funny. Why? Because everyone says that about you. The corner of his mouth moved. Again. That almost smile. Maren noticed. She hated that she was beginning to look for it. The silence between them became less uncomfortable. That was the dangerous part. Comfort. Maren knew comfort was how people lower their defenses. She had learned that lesson once before. But with Nico, it felt different. Because he never tried to force his way through her walls. He simply stood there, waiting. And somehow that was harder to resist. You never answered my question. Nico's voice interrupted her thoughts. What question? Why you left accounting? Maren looked away. She knew this conversation would come eventually. She just didn't know she would hate it when it arrived. I worked too hard. That's not the whole answer. No. She sighed. You really don't give up. Not when something matters. The words were quiet, and they affected her more than they should have. Maren looked at him. Why does it matter? Nico held her gaze. Because you act like you lost something. That was the problem with him. He noticed things too. She looked down. I lost trust. The answer surprised even her. Nico didn't interrupt. So she continued. People think losing a job is the hardest part. Her fingers touched the edge of the book beside her. It isn't. What is? Finding out the people who told you they believed in you. She paused. Never actually did. Nico's expression changed. Not pity. She appreciated that. She hated pity. Something else. Understanding. I know what that feels like. Maren looked at him. You do. Yes. The answer was immediate. And for the first time she saw it. The reason he carried himself the way he did. The reason he trusted almost nobody. The reason every decision looked heavier than it should. My father died, Nico said. Maren stayed quiet. Everyone expected me to become him. His voice remained calm, but she could hear the weight beneath it. The leader. The decision-maker. The person who never hesitates. And did you? A long pause. Yes. But... Nico looked away. But I don't know if I became what he wanted. He looked back at her. Or what everyone else needed. Maren understood. Because she had done something similar. She had become smaller because people told her that was safer. He had become harder because people told him that was necessary. Different choices. Same wound. That evening, something happened that neither of them expected. The power went out. Not the entire city. Just the Marqueti estate. The backup system started immediately, but several areas remained dark for a few minutes. Maren was in the kitchen when she heard a noise. She turned. Nico stood there holding a flashlight. The sight was almost absurd. The feared head of the Marqueti family, standing in the kitchen, holding a flashlight. For some reason she laughed. Actually laughed. Nico looked at her. What? Nothing. You're laughing. I know. Why? She covered her smile. Because this is the first time I've seen you look normal. He stared at her. Normal? Yes. In the dark. No. She looked at the flashlight. Without everyone expecting you to be someone else. The words stayed between them. For once, Nico had no answer. The lights returned. The moment disappeared. But neither of them forgot it. Later that night, Nico stood alone in his office. On his desk was the folder. The financial records. The problem. The betrayal. But his thoughts were somewhere else. A woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. A woman who had every reason to walk away, yet stayed. He realized something that bothered him. He trusted Maren. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to be dangerous. Across the city, Maren sat in her apartment, staring at the same document she had copied for her own notes. She told herself she was investigating the problem. Nothing more. But when she closed her eyes, she remembered Nico's words. I know what that feels like. For years, she had believed nobody understood. Now someone did. And that was the most frightening discovery of all. Because Maren Kowalski could handle danger. She could handle secrets. She could handle enemies. But she wasn't sure she could handle caring about someone again. End of chapter 7. Maren Kowalski had always known there was a difference between hiding something and burying it. Hiding meant you knew where the thing was. You could return to it whenever you wanted. Burying meant you convinced yourself it no longer existed. You told yourself the past was finished. You told yourself the person you used to be was gone. For 5 years, Maren had been very good at burying. The problem was that the past had a way of finding its way back to the surface, usually when you were least prepared for it. The first time Nico asked about her old career, Maren avoided answering. The second time, she gave him a half-truth. The third time, she realized something uncomfortable. She wanted to tell him. That was the part that scared her. Not the memory itself. Not the pain. The trust. Trust was far more dangerous than anger. Anger kept people away. Trust invited them closer. And Maren had spent 5 years building walls high enough that nobody could climb over them, including herself. 3 days after the power outage, Nico asked her to meet him in his office again. This time, there were no files waiting. No reports. No financial questions. Just 2 cups of coffee sitting on the desk. Maren stopped at the doorway. You're trying something new. Nico looked up. What? Coffee before paperwork. A pause. Then he looked at the cups. I thought people usually appreciated coffee. They do. She stepped inside. I'm just surprised you remembered. Nico frowned slightly. Remembered what? That I drink coffee. You drink coffee every morning. Maren stared at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled. That's slightly unsettling. Why? Because most people don't notice things about me. The words came out softer than she intended. Nico heard them. Of course he did. He noticed everything. I noticed things. Yes. She picked up the coffee. I'm starting to realize that. They sat across from each other. For once, there were no documents between them. No problem to solve. No crisis demanding attention. Just 2 people sitting in the same room. And somehow that felt more dangerous. Maren. She looked up. I want to understand something. That sounds like a question. It is. She waited. Why did you choose this job? There it was. The question she knew would come. Not why did she leave accounting? Why did she become a housekeeper? The answer was harder. Because the truth was not simple. I needed something quiet. Nico studied her. Quiet. Yes. After working with numbers and investigations, she looked down at her coffee. Especially after that. He didn't push. That was one of the things she had started noticing about him. Nico Marqueti knew how to apply pressure. But he also knew when not to. I used to think being good at something meant you should keep doing it forever. She smiled faintly. Turns out that's not always true. What happened? The room became still. Maren took a slow breath. Then she opened the door she had kept locked for 5 years. I was a forensic accountant. She expected surprise. She expected questions. Instead, Nico simply nodded, as if he had already known. You knew. I suspected. She looked at him. That's annoying. Why? Because I wanted to reveal it dramatically. A small smile appeared. There are very few things about you that are dramatic. That's rude. It's accurate. For some reason, that made her laugh. A real laugh. Brief, but real. Then the laughter faded. I worked for a large accounting firm in Chicago. Her fingers tightened around a coffee cup. I was good at my job. Not arrogance. Just fact. Nico understood that. I investigated financial records. Companies, executives, partnerships. And you found something. She nodded. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. 5 years earlier. Maren remembered the office. The glass walls. The conference room. The faces of people who had smiled at her before everything changed. The company had been one of their biggest clients. A respected organization. Successful. Public. The kind of company people trusted. But the numbers told a different story. There were inconsistencies. Small ones. The kind most people ignored. A payment here. A missing document there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But patterns mattered. Maren spent months following the information. And eventually, she found the truth. Someone inside the company had been manipulating records. Not a mistake. Not incompetence. Intentional. I reported it. Nico remained silent. And that was when everything changed. Her voice became quieter. The people who were supposed to support me stopped answering calls. She looked at the window. My supervisor suddenly said my conclusions were incomplete. And your fiancé? The question caught her, because she had never mentioned him. But Nico had noticed. Again. You knew there was someone. You avoid talking about that part more than the rest. Maren looked down. He was involved. Nico's expression hardened. Directly? No. A pause. But he benefited. That answer seemed to bother him. More than she expected. He knew. Yes. And he didn't tell you? No. Silence. Maren continued. He said he was protecting me. A bitter smile crossed her face. People love using that phrase when they mean protecting themselves. Nico looked away. Because he understood. Maybe too well. The investigation collapsed. Maren's voice was calm. Almost too calm. The company denied everything. My supervisor questioned my judgment. Suddenly, I was the person who had made accusations without enough evidence. But you were right. Yes. Then why did you leave? That was the hardest question. Because the answer wasn't about the job. It was about herself. Because I was tired. Nico looked at her. I wasn't tired of working. She shook her head. I was tired of proving I deserved to be believed. The words sat between them. Heavy. Honest. For a moment, Nico said nothing. Then, I understand. Maren looked at him. You really do. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Because Nico had spent years proving himself to enemies, to family, to people who would never be satisfied. Two completely different lives. Same exhaustion. That afternoon, something changed. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. There was no sudden confession. No grand moment. Just something quieter. Trust. Small. Fragile. Growing. When Maren returned to the documents later that evening, she noticed Nico had changed something. He had added her notes directly into the investigation file. Not copied. Not rewritten. Her handwriting remained. Her observations remained. Her work was there. Visible. Maren stared at the page. A strange emotion moved through her. She had spent 5 years watching people erase her contributions. Now someone had preserved them. You added my notes. Nico looked up from his desk. Yes. Why? He seemed confused by the question. Because they're yours. That simple answer almost hurt. Because it should not have meant so much. But it did. Later that night, after Maren left, Nico remained in the office. He looked at the empty chair across from him. A chair that had once belonged only to employees. Now it felt like a place where important decisions were made. That thought surprised him. Maren Kowalski had entered his home as someone nobody noticed. Now he found himself waiting for her opinions, looking for her reactions, trusting her instincts. And that was dangerous. Because Nico knew exactly what happened when you cared about someone. You gave them the power to hurt you. Across town, Maren sat at her kitchen table. Her laptop was open. The old files were still there. The past. The betrayal. The reason she ran. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel ashamed of who she used to be. She had not lost that woman. The accountant. The investigator. The person who saw what others missed. She had simply hidden her away. And now, for reasons she did not fully understand, she was bringing her back. Because someone had tried to steal from the Marqueti family. Someone had created a lie. And Maren Kowalski had built her entire career on one simple truth. Every lie leaves a record. And every record tells a story. End of chapter 8. Nico Marqueti had always believed loyalty was the foundation of everything. Family, business, power. Without loyalty, nothing lasted. Not an empire. Not a marriage. Not a friendship. But lately, he had begun to question something he had never questioned before. What happened when loyalty became an excuse to ignore the truth? The problem with trusting someone for a long time was that memories could become stronger than reality. Sal Greco had been part of Nico's life since childhood. They had grown up in the same neighborhoods, sat at the same dinner tables, learn the same rules. When Nico's father died, Sal had been the first person beside him. Everyone else saw a new leader, a man who had inherited a powerful name. Sal saw the person underneath. At least, that was what Nico believed. Now he wasn't sure. And uncertainty was something Nico hated, because uncertainty meant he had missed something. And Nico Marqueti survived by not missing things. The morning started with a meeting. Not a family meeting. A business meeting. The kind where everyone arrived with carefully prepared expressions and carefully chosen words. Maren was not supposed to attend. At least, that was what everyone assumed. But Nico asked her to be there. The decision immediately changed the atmosphere. Several people noticed, especially Sal. You're bringing her into more meetings now. Sal said it casually. Too casually. Nico looked at him. She has information we need. Sal smiled. I'm not questioning her intelligence. No. A pause. I'm questioning whether she understands what she's involved in. The room became quiet. Maren remained still. She had learned something important about men like Sal. They rarely attacked directly. They tested. They pushed. They waited to see where someone would break. Nico's expression changed slightly. She understands enough. Sal looked at him. You're sure? The question was simple, but it carried something beneath it. A challenge. Nico answered immediately. Yes. Maren noticed. Not the word. The certainty. That mattered. After the meeting ended, Maren found Nico alone in the hallway. You didn't have to do that. He looked at her. Do what? Defend me? A pause. I wasn't defending you. She raised an eyebrow. No. He stepped closer. I was correcting him. That answer almost made her smile. Very different. Yes. You really believe that? Yes. The certainty in his voice was almost frustrating, because Maren was used to people who said things they didn't mean. Nico was different. When he spoke, it felt like he had already decided the truth before opening his mouth. You trust me a lot for someone who barely knows me. His expression changed. Not much, but enough. I trust what I've seen. Maren looked at him. And what have you seen? Nico answered quietly. Someone who could have walked away. A pause. But didn't. That evening, Victoria Marqueti surprised Maren. Again. The older woman found her organizing paperwork in the library. You're becoming a habit. Maren looked up. That sounds dangerous. It might be. Victoria sat across from her. A rare thing. Maren noticed immediately. People like Victoria did not sit unless they intended to have a conversation. You remind me of someone. Maren closed the folder. Who? Myself. That was not the answer she expected. Victoria looked toward the window. When I was younger, people assumed I was useful because of my family name. She smiled faintly. They never considered that maybe I was useful because I was capable. Maren understood. More than she wanted to. People see what benefits them. Victoria nodded. Yes. Then she looked directly at her. And they often underestimate women who do not demand attention. The word stayed with Maren, because that was exactly what had happened. Her entire life, people underestimated her because she wasn't loud, because she wasn't trying to prove herself every second, because confidence looked different on different people. Meanwhile, across the city, Sal Greco was losing patience. He sat in his office, staring at the reports. At first, he had underestimated Maren. Everyone had. That was the mistake. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform did not look threatening. She did not look like someone who could unravel years of careful work. But Sal had learned something. The quiet ones were often the most dangerous. Because they listened. Because they remembered. Because nobody noticed when they were collecting information. His phone rang. He answered. She's getting closer. A voice responded. Sal looked toward the window. I know. A pause. No. His expression hardened. She doesn't know everything yet. Another pause. But she will. He ended the call. For the first time, Sal understood something. The problem was no longer the missing money. The problem was Maren Kowalski. That night, Nico found Maren in the kitchen. Again. It was becoming a strange pattern. The most important conversations in his life seemed to happen in ordinary places. Not offices. Not meeting rooms. Kitchens. Hallways. Quiet moments nobody planned. You work too much. Maren looked over her shoulder. That's ironic coming from you. I'm serious. So am I. Nico walked closer. You should rest. She smiled. Are you giving me an order? No. That surprised her. What then? He thought about the answer. Then, a request. The difference was small. But important. Maren looked at him. You're learning. What? How to talk to people. That sounds like an insult. It isn't. She turned back to the counter. It's progress. For some reason, that amused him. You think I need progress? I think everyone does. The answer was simple. But Nico found himself remembering it. Everyone does. Even him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. But not uncomfortable. Maren realized something. She was no longer afraid of silence around him. Before, silence meant judgment. Awkwardness. Distance. With Nico, silence felt different. Like neither person needed to fill it. You know what bothers me? Nico asked. She looked at him. What? You notice everything about everyone. That sounds useful. It is. Then why does it bother you? His eyes met hers. Because I wonder what you notice about me. The question caught her off guard. Because it was honest. Not a challenge. Not a test. A real question. Maren looked at him carefully. She could have answered with something easy. Something polite. Instead, she told the truth. You're tired. Nico didn't move. You're angry. But not because you want power. His expression changed slightly. You're angry because you think everything depends on you. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, you see too much. Maren looked down. That's what everyone says. No. His voice was softer. Most people say that because they're afraid. I say it because it's true. That night, Maren returned to the documents. But something had changed. The numbers were still important. The investigation still mattered. But now there was something else. A person. A family. A choice. She had spent years believing caring about people was a weakness. Now she was beginning to understand something different. Caring was not the weakness. Giving the wrong people access to your heart was. And somewhere inside the Marqueti family, someone had made a very dangerous mistake. They had assumed Maren Kowalski was only a woman who cleaned rooms. They had forgotten something. Before she ever learned how to organize a house, she learned how to uncover the truth. End of chapter 9. Maren Kowalski had always believed numbers were honest. People lied. Memories changed. Promises broke. But numbers simply waited. They did not care who was powerful. They did not care who was afraid. They did not care who sat at the head of the table or who stood quietly in the corner. Numbers recorded what happened. That was why she had loved accounting. Not because of the mathematics. Not because of the reports. Because numbers did not pretend. A person could smile while betraying you. A person could say they were protecting you while destroying your life. But somewhere, hidden among the records, the truth always remained. And now that truth was pointing towards someone inside the Marqueti family. Someone close. Someone trusted. The next week changed the atmosphere inside the estate. Everyone felt it. The staff whispered less. The family members watched more. Even the house itself seemed different. Maren noticed small things. A conversation stopping when she entered a room. A document being moved from one place to another. A person suddenly becoming too careful. Fear had entered the house. Not the obvious kind. Not panic. Something quieter. The kind that appeared when people realized secrets were no longer safe. Nico noticed it too. But unlike everyone else, he did not react immediately. That was one of the things Maren had learned about him. He did not rush. He absorbed information. He waited. Some people mistook that for weakness. They were wrong. Nico Marqueti was dangerous precisely because he was patient. The problem was that patience became much harder when emotions were involved. And Maren was becoming an emotion he could not easily control. She found him late one evening in his office. Again, it was becoming a habit neither of them mentioned. The room was dark except for the desk lamp. Nico looked exhausted, more than usual. Maren placed a cup of coffee beside him. He looked at it, then at her. You're becoming predictable. She raised an eyebrow. That's a strange thing to say from someone who drinks the same coffee every morning. I like consistency. So do I. A small pause. Clearly, Maren sat across from him. I found something. The change in his expression was immediate. Professional. Focused. What? She opened the folder. This supplier. Nico looked down. The same one. Yes. We already checked it. Yes. Then what changed? Maren turned a document toward him. I looked at the timing. Nico studied the page. Maren continued. The transactions are not random. What does that mean? It means someone wasn't only moving money. She paused. They were creating a pattern that would look normal if nobody looked closely. Nico's expression became colder. Someone inside knows how our systems work. Yes. Someone who has access. Yes. Silence. The answer was obvious. And that was what made it dangerous. Nico stood and walked toward the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Maren watched him. She knew that look. The moment when someone was trying to decide whether accepting the truth was more painful than denying it. Finally he spoke. How long have you suspected? Since I found the first connection. And you didn't tell me. Maren remained calm. Because suspicion is not evidence. He looked at her. You're careful. I have to be. Because of what happened before? Yes. The answer was quiet. Nico nodded slowly. He understood. More than most people. The next day, Nico called a private meeting. Only family. Only trusted people. Maren was surprised when he asked her to attend. Are you sure? Yes. This will change how people see me. Nico looked at her. They already see you. That sentence stayed with her. Because he was right. The invisible woman was gone. The meeting began at noon. Victoria was there. Sal was there. Several senior members of the family were present. The atmosphere was heavy. Nico placed the documents on the table. We have a problem. Nobody spoke. He continued. Someone has been manipulating records connected to our transportation operations. Sal leaned forward. Do we know who? The question came quickly. Too quickly. Maren noticed. So did Nico. Not yet. Sal nodded. Then we should be careful about making assumptions. Maren looked at him. Interesting. Because nobody had made an accusation. Yet Sal was already defending himself. A small thing. A tiny reaction. But tiny things mattered. Victoria looked at Maren. What do you believe? The entire room turned toward her. Years ago, that would have terrified her. Standing in front of powerful people. Speaking. Being judged. But she had already survived worse rooms. So she answered honestly. I believe someone wanted the records to look complicated. Nobody moved. She continued. The goal wasn't to hide one mistake. Her finger touched the document. The goal was to make the truth difficult to find. A silence followed. Then Sal spoke. And you believe you can find it? Maren looked at him. Yes. The confidence in her voice surprised even herself. Sal smiled slightly. Very confident. No. She closed the folder. Experienced. After the meeting, Victoria stopped her. You handled yourself well. Maren smiled faintly. Thank you. You know, most people would have tried to impress them. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I know. Victoria looked at her. That is why you did. Later that evening, Nico found Maren outside the library. You were different today. She looked at him. Different? Yes. How? He thought for a moment. Like you remembered who you were. The word surprised her. Because she had. For years, she had separated herself from the woman she used to be. The accountant. the investigator, the person who trusted her own judgment. But today, standing in front of the Marqueti family, she had felt something return. Not pride, not ambition, something simpler. Confidence. You know what scares me? Maren asked. Nico looked at her. What? Being good at this again. He frowned slightly. Why? Because if I'm good at it, she paused. It means I never really escape. Nico was quiet. Then, maybe you weren't supposed to escape. Maren looked at him. Then what was I supposed to do? His answer came softly. Heal. The word affected her more than she expected. Because nobody had ever said that. Everyone had told her to move on. Forget. Start over. Nobody had told her she was allowed to heal. That night, Sal stood in his office. The same place where he had spent years making decisions. The same place where he had believed he was untouchable. But now there was a problem. Maren Kowalski. A woman he had ignored. A woman everyone had ignored. A woman who was slowly pulling apart the carefully built wall around him. He looked at the file in front of him, then made a decision. Not a loud one, not an emotional one, a calculated one, the kind that changed everything. Because Sal understood something now. He could not convince Nico to distrust Maren. He could not make her disappear. So he needed another strategy. If the family would not turn against her, he would make her turn against them. Maren did not know it yet. Nico did not know it yet. But the investigation had reached a new stage. The enemy was no longer hiding. They were watching. And soon, the woman who had spent years avoiding attention would discover the most dangerous truth of all. Sometimes being seen was not the beginning of acceptance. Sometimes, it was the moment someone decided you had become a threat. End of chapter 10. The first thing Maren noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of an empty apartment building after midnight. This silence was wrong. It felt interrupted. She stood outside her apartment door with her grocery bag hanging from one arm. The hallway light buzzed overhead, casting a pale yellow glow across the worn carpet. She frowned. She always locked her door. Always. Tonight, the deadbolt wasn't fully engaged. A thin line of darkness separated the door from the frame. Someone had been inside. Every instinct she had told her not to move. Her heart began to pound, but years of training forced her breathing to remain steady. She slowly stepped back and pulled out her phone. Nico. He answered on the second ring. Maren, I think someone was in my apartment. Silence. Then his voice changed. Are you inside? No. Stay exactly where you are. But, Maren. His tone left no room for argument. I'm coming. 23 minutes later, a black SUV stopped in front of the building. Nico stepped out before the driver had fully parked. He crossed the sidewalk quickly, his eyes immediately finding her. Are you hurt? No. He looked her over anyway. Only after he seemed satisfied did he turn toward the apartment door. Stay behind me, she almost argued. Almost. Instead, she nodded. The apartment was dark. Nothing appeared broken. Nothing overturned. The furniture stood exactly where she had left it. The television, the bookshelves, the kitchen, everything looked normal. Too normal. Nico walked through each room methodically, while Maren remained near the entrance. Finally, he called her. Come here. She entered the bedroom. Every drawer had been opened. Not violently. Carefully. Someone had searched. They knew exactly what they were looking for, she whispered. Nico knelt beside an open storage box. What was here? Maren froze. Inside the box were old notebooks, employment records, a few photographs. One folder was missing. Color drained from her face. No. Nico looked up. What? My investigation files. He stood. The accounting case. She nodded slowly. They're gone. Neither of them spoke during the drive back. Chicago blurred past the windows. Streetlights reflected across the lake. Maren stared outside, replaying every possibility. They know who I am. Nico remained quiet. They know what I used to do. Still silence. Finally he said, they wanted you to know they know. She turned toward him. It wasn't theft. No. It was a message. Yes. Neither of them said the obvious part. Messages usually came before something worse. When they arrived at the Marqueti estate, Maren looked at the front entrance. I'll stay at a hotel. No. I don't want to inconvenience. No. His voice was calm, firm. You'll stay here. She sighed. Nico, I wasn't asking. She folded her arms. You know, most people don't enjoy being ordered around. I noticed. And I'm making an exception. She stared at him. You are impossible. So I've been told. For the first time that evening, the corner of her mouth lifted. Barely. It was enough. Victoria was waiting in the foyer. She took one look at Maren's face. What happened? Someone entered her apartment, Nico answered. Victoria's expression darkened. Was anything taken? One file. What file? Maren hesitated. My old forensic accounting records. Victoria understood immediately. They're trying to frighten you. They succeeded. No. Victoria stepped closer. They're trying to make you leave. Maren looked at the older woman. Will it work? A long pause. Then Victoria smiled faintly. I don't think you're the type. The guest room had been prepared before midnight. It was larger than Maren's entire apartment. She stood in the doorway, uncomfortable. I can't stay here. Nico looked at her. You can. I work here. You also need somewhere safe. She laughed quietly. Safe? The word felt strange. I haven't thought about being safe in years. His expression softened. You should. Sleep never came. At 2 a.m, Maren gave up. She wrapped a sweater around herself and wandered downstairs. The mansion was almost completely dark. Only the kitchen lights remained on. She smiled to herself. Of course. He was there. Nico stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Without looking up, he said, I wondered how long it would take. You made 2 cups? I know you don't sleep when you're worried. She leaned against the counter. You're starting to notice too much. So are you. He handed her a mug. Their fingers brushed. Only for a second. Neither moved away immediately. I keep thinking about those files, Maren said quietly. They weren't enough to reopen the old case. No. But they proved who I used to be. Nico nodded. They wanted to remind you. They wanted to remind me that running away didn't erase anything. Silence settled between them. Finally, Nico spoke. When my father died. She looked at him. I spent months sleeping in this kitchen. She blinked. Here. I couldn't sleep upstairs. Why? He looked into his coffee. Because every room reminded me he wasn't there anymore. His voice remained calm. Too calm. The house was full of people. He smiled without humor. I've never felt more alone. Maren understood. You carried everyone. I tried. And nobody carried you. He met her eyes. No. She stepped closer without realizing it. I know that feeling. For a long moment, they simply stood there. The distance between them had almost disappeared. Neither seemed willing to acknowledge it. You know what I realized tonight? Nico asked. What? If someone came after you. He stopped. She waited. I wouldn't forgive myself. Her heart skipped. Nico, I should never have involved you. You didn't. She shook her head. I chose to stay. I know. But that doesn't make it easier. She looked at him carefully. You blame yourself for everything. Usually for good reason. No. She smiled sadly. Usually because no one ever told you that you didn't have to. His eyes searched hers. Slowly. Quietly. As though seeing her for the first time. Maren. Yes. I'm glad you stayed. The words were almost a whisper. So am I. Neither of them knew who moved first. Perhaps neither did. The distance disappeared naturally. His hand rose carefully, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. His fingertips brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. So this is the woman everyone keeps underestimating. She smiled softly. And this is the man everyone keeps getting wrong. Breath. A heartbeat. Then he kissed her. Gentle. Tentative. Not a promise. Question. She answered by kissing him back. The world seemed to disappear. No family, no investigation, no missing files, only warmth, only relief, only the realization that neither of them had been alone as long as they believed. Then, Nico's phone rang. They both froze. The screen glowed between them. Sal Greco. Nico closed his eyes briefly before answering. What? Sal's voice came through sharply. We've got a situation. Nico's expression hardened. What happened? Warehouse 12. A pause. The police are there. Nico looked toward Maren. Something inside him shifted instantly from tenderness to command. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He ended the call. Maren already knew. The moment was over. The investigation, she asked. He nodded. No. His voice was lower than before. The war just started. End of chapter 11. Rain swept across Chicago before dawn, turning the city into a blur of silver lights and black pavement. By the time Nico's SUV pulled into Warehouse 12, red and blue lights flashed across rows of shipping containers. Police officers stood behind yellow tape. Employees huddled together in small groups, whispering. Maren remained inside the vehicle for a moment. This feels wrong, she said quietly. Nico looked at her. It is. He stepped out first. She followed. Almost immediately, Detective Gabriel Reyes approached them. He was taller than Maren expected, his gray suit damp from the rain, his expression unreadable. Mr. Marqueti, detective. Reyes glanced toward Maren. So you're Ms. Kowalski. I am. I've heard quite a bit about you. She offered a polite smile. I can't imagine all of it was flattering. One corner of Reyes' mouth lifted. No, it wasn't. The warehouse itself looked untouched. No broken windows. No overturned crates. Nothing dramatic. That was what made it unsettling. Reyes led them toward a temporary office overlooking the loading docks. We received an anonymous tip, he explained. About what? Financial records. Nico's jaw tightened. Reyes placed a folder on the desk. Someone wanted us to find these. Maren opened it. Photocopies. Invoices. Internal payment authorizations. At first glance, they looked familiar. Too familiar. She slowly turned another page. Then another. Her heartbeat quickened. These aren't originals. Reyes watched her closely. You noticed. They're copies. She pointed toward the paper. And someone rearranged the page order. Nico looked between them. What difference does that make? It changes the story. She spread several pages across the desk. These transactions originally belonged to different reporting periods. She took a slow breath. Someone intentionally grouped them together. Why? To make them appear connected. Reyes folded his arms. So whoever prepared this wanted investigators to reach one conclusion. Nico understood first. They wanted us looking at the wrong person. Maren nodded. Exactly. Reyes studied her for a long moment. Where did you learn to see things like that? She smiled faintly. I used to do this for a living. I know. The detective's tone remained calm. I also know why you stopped. Her smile faded. You looked into me. I look into everyone. Fair enough. She couldn't argue with that. Reyes closed the folder. I don't think you're the problem. Nico looked at him. You didn't. No. The detective's eyes remained on Maren. I think someone expected me to. On the drive back, neither Maren nor Nico spoke. The rain beat softly against the windshield. Finally, Nico broke the silence. You were right. She looked over. About what? Someone's trying to redirect the investigation. I wish I wasn't. So do I. The Marqueti estate felt different when they returned. Word had already spread. Servants avoided eye contact. Family members whispered behind closed doors. Even Victoria looked unusually tense. She called Nico into the study immediately. Maren started walking toward the kitchen. Ms. Kowalski. She turned. Victoria stood in the doorway. Would you stay? Maren hesitated. If you'd like, I would. The study smelled faintly of old leather and coffee. Victoria closed the door. Nico. He looked up. Sit. He obeyed without argument. That alone told Maren how much respect he had for his aunt. Victoria remained standing. I've spent 30 years watching men mistake confidence for wisdom. Neither interrupted. Your father wasn't perfect. She looked toward the portrait hanging above the fireplace. But he knew one thing. She turned back. He always trusted the person willing to tell him something he didn't want to hear. Silence settled over the room. Then she looked directly at Nico. Have you decided who that person is now? His answer came without hesitation. Maren. Victoria nodded once. I hoped you'd say that. A knock interrupted the moment. One of the household staff entered nervously. Mr. Marqueti, what is it? A package arrived. I wasn't expecting one. There was no return address. Nico exchanged a glance with Maren. I'll take it. The box was small. Plain brown cardboard. No markings. No fingerprints visible. Maren's stomach tightened. Don't open it here, she said. Nico looked at her. You think? I don't know. But whoever entered my apartment wanted us to react. Rhea's earlier words echoed in her mind. Someone expected us to reach the wrong conclusion. Nico carried the package into another room. Carefully. Inside, there was only one object. A black leather notebook. Old, worn. Its edges softened by years of use. Victoria inhaled sharply. Nico. He looked down. What is it? She answered almost in a whisper. Your father's household ledger. Nico stared at the notebook. I thought this disappeared after the funeral. So did I. He opened the cover. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. Neat. Precise. The first page wasn't financial. It wasn't business. It simply read, a family survives because someone remembers the people no one else notices. Maren read the sentence twice, then a third time. She slowly turned another page. There were birthdays, anniversaries, the gardener's daughter's college acceptance, the chauffeur's wife's surgery, the cook's favorite flowers, household repairs, scholarships quietly paid for employees' children. Every page documented people, not profits. Victoria smiled sadly. Your father never called it a ledger. What did he call it? She looked toward Maren. He called it the heart of the house. For several minutes no one spoke. Finally Nico closed the notebook. I never understood why he kept this. Maren reached out gently, running a finger across the worn leather cover. It isn't accounting. No, it's memory. She looked up. He wasn't managing a household. She smiled. He was taking care of a family. Nico's eyes remained on her. And you've been doing the same thing. The realization struck him all at once. Every schedule Maren reorganized. Every birthday card she quietly reminded the staff about. Every conflict she solved before anyone noticed. She hadn't just been cleaning the estate. She had been holding it together. The same way his father once had. That evening, Maren sat alone in the library with a ledger resting open before her. One page had been folded. Inside, tucked between the yellowing paper, was a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. When people stop seeing those who serve them, the house begins to fall apart. She stared at the sentence. A chill ran down her spine, because someone else had understood that truth years before she arrived. She wasn't the first invisible person in this house. She was simply the first one someone had finally chosen to see. A quiet knock came at the library door. Nico stepped inside. Neither of them spoke immediately. He walked to the table and rested one hand on the old ledger. My father would have liked you. Maren looked down, suddenly unsure what to say. I wish I could have met him. So do I. He paused. Because I think he would have told me something much sooner than I figured it out myself. She looked up. What? Nico held her gaze. That this house was never saved by the strongest person in it. His voice softened. It was always saved by the one who noticed everyone else. Outside, the rain finally stopped. But neither of them noticed. For the first time since the investigation began, they weren't looking at evidence. They were looking at the reason it mattered. End of chapter 12. 1 year was enough time for a person to become unrecognizable. Maren Kowalski knew that better than anyone. A year ago, she had stood in the kitchen of the Marqueti estate wearing a simple uniform, carrying a stack of forgotten documents, and moving through rooms where people barely noticed her presence. She knew every corner of the house, every schedule, every preference, every quiet problem nobody wanted to acknowledge. But nobody knew her. Nobody knew that the woman arranging flowers in the dining room had once investigated multimillion-dollar financial cases. Nobody knew that the person organizing household expenses could read corporate records faster than most executives. Nobody knew that the quiet woman who apologized when someone bumped into her was the same woman who had dismantled the carefully hidden betrayal. Back then, she had been invisible. Now, when Maren entered a room, people stopped talking. Not because they feared her, because they respected her. And that difference meant everything. The Marqueti headquarters in downtown Chicago looked nothing like the old stories people whispered about. The building was still impressive, still elegant, still carrying the weight of generations. But the atmosphere had changed. The old system had survived. The old traditions had not. At the center of the transformation was a woman who had never wanted power. Maren sat in the conference room reviewing the final quarterly reports. Around the table were executives, advisors, and department leaders. A year ago, most of them would have questioned why she belonged there. Today, they waited for her opinion before making decisions. The transportation division is stable, one executive said. Maren nodded. And the construction side? Improved. Improved isn't a number. The man quickly looked back at his report. A few people smiled. They had learned something about Maren. She was kind. She was patient. But she never accepted vague answers. Revenue increased 14%, he corrected. Good. She turned the page. But we're still spending too much time correcting problems that should have been prevented. The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable. Focused. Because everyone knew she was right. Nico had once told her that the most valuable person in a room was not always the loudest. Sometimes it was the person who noticed what everyone else ignored. After the meeting ended, Maren stayed behind. She liked quiet moments. Maybe because for so long, quiet had been the only place where she belonged. Now quiet was something she chose, not something forced upon her. She looked out at Chicago through the glass windows. The city had changed. Or maybe she had. You know, most executives leave immediately after meetings. She smiled before turning around. Nico. He stood near the door, still wearing the same serious expression that made strangers nervous. But Maren knew better now. She knew the man behind it. You were listening. I was waiting. That sounds suspiciously like listening. It isn't. She raised an eyebrow. You still do that. Do what? Lie badly. For a moment, he almost smiled. Almost. A year later, she still found that strangely satisfying. He walked toward her. The difference between the man she first met and the man standing before her was subtle. Others might not notice. Maren did. The old Nico carried everything alone. Every decision. Every responsibility. Every mistake. The new Nico still carried responsibility. But he no longer believed he had to carry everything by himself. You were hard on them. They needed it. They respect you. They respected my position. No. He shook his head. They respect you. Maren looked away. Old habits. Old doubts. They disappeared slowly. Not all at once. Healing rarely happened like that. But it happened. That evening, they returned to the Marqueti estate. The house looked almost exactly the same. The same stone walls. The same long hallways. The same library. But it felt different. Because homes were not built from walls. They were built from people. Maren walked into the library. The old household ledger sat on the shelf. The one that started everything. She removed it carefully. The leather cover had aged. The pages had softened. But the words inside remained. Names. Memories. People. She opened the first page. Her fingers paused. The sentence written there still affected her. A family survives because someone remembers the people no one else notices. She smiled. You were right. Nico stood behind her. My father. She nodded. He understood something most people don't. What? She closed the ledger. People think families are held together by the strongest person. She looked at him. But they're not. A small smile. They're held together by the people who remember everyone else. Later that night, the estate filled with guests. Not powerful people. Not business partners. Not politicians. Employees. Their families. People who had worked for the Marqueti household for decades. A tradition Maren had brought back. A simple celebration. A reminder. The old dining room was full. Laughter replaced silence. Stories replaced tension. For a moment, Maren stood at the edge of the room, watching. The same place where she had once stood unnoticed. Only now people came to her. They asked her opinion. They thanked her. They included her. A young employee approached. "Ms. Kowalski?" "Yes." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He glanced around. "Are you part of the family?" The question made her pause. Before she could answer, an older servant nearby laughed softly. "I think everyone has been asking that." The young man looked embarrassed. Maren smiled. "It's complicated." Then Nico appeared beside her. His hand gently rested against hers. "No." Everyone looked over. Nico looked at the young employee. "It's not complicated." Maren looked at him. He continued. "She's family." The room became quiet. Not because anyone disagreed, because everyone understood the importance of those words. A year ago, Maren Kowalski had been the woman nobody saw. Now she was the person everyone recognized. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Maren returned the ledger to the library. She opened it one final time. At the very back was a blank page. For months, she had wondered what belonged there. Tonight, she finally knew. She picked up a pen and wrote, "The strongest houses are not built on power." She paused, then continued, "They are built on the people who quietly hold them together." She closed the book, placed it back on the shelf, then turned off the light. Outside, Chicago continued moving. Cars passed. Buildings shined. The city never truly slept. And inside the Marqueti house, something that had almost been lost had finally returned. Not power. Not reputation. Not control. Something far more difficult to find. A home.